Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, Bryce. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. A little tired, but overall, well.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I've seen you a lot online, so I said to myself, damn, we have to talk to this guy, find out what the deal is.
Awesome.
Yeah, so, let's
Appreciate
jump
the
straight.
invite, by the way. I didn't
Ye-
thank you for that.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So let's jump straight into it, Bryce. And tell us a little bit about your religious background. Did you grow up in a religious environment? Were you raised religious? And if you weren't, was there any kind of religious influence in your formative years?
Yeah. So let's see. I've told this story so many times. I always try to think of ways to get creative with it, right? So first of
Yeah,
all, let me see. Did I grow up in religion? I think is essentially the question you're asking.
yeah.
I'm American, so if you grow up in the United States, you grew up in religion. I don't care what people tell you their background is, it's a religious background. And what I mean by that is religion is everywhere, from
Yeah,
cradle to grave. It's in our culture, it's in our homes, it's in our on our bookshelves, in our schools, it's in our politics. So it's really impossible to escape altogether, even for those who grew up in a largely secular household, which I would say is myself. My parents, they're both Christian. They both identify as Christian. My mom was certainly raised in a Christian household herself, but they raised me in what is essentially a secular household. We weren't particularly religious growing up. We didn't attend church regularly. I had gone every now and again, especially when, visiting grandparents and extended family and stuff like that, Christmas, special occasions, but it wasn't like a regular thing. And so I grew up kind of with the background of Christianity, but I was not inundated with God speech, so to speak, all the time.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I was culturally indoctrinated to accept Christianity as the default
yeah.
because, as I mentioned, I'm American and I'm also black. You know,
Hmm.
well, you're South African, so I guess I should say colored because it's a little bit different.
Yeah,
But here we don't distinguish between the two. I'm African American,
right.
and that is something that is correlated to religiosity. Um,
Yeah,
I, I read a statistic recently that 90% of Americans believe in some sort of God. They're like theists of some kind, which seems like a really high number.
does seem abnormally high.
But I totally believe it. It makes sense. It comports with my experience. But so 97% of Americans, but 97% of African Americans are. So black people in America are actually statistically more likely to be religious
Right.
than other demographics. So it's very much associated with culture, from that perspective. And it's linked to racism and how from all the way back from the slave period, where black people were given religion by the colonizers for various reasons, but at the same time it was the only thing they really had to turn to. It was their only measure of freedom, so they kind of adopted it and internalized it, and it was their only hope as far as they understood it. And so it's just kind of perpetuated itself generally
Mhm.
generationally, year after year. And so that's how that happened. So I grew up with that background, but I have to say I've always been kind of a skeptic. I mean, even when I was a Christian, I was a Christian for the majority of my life, much longer than I've been an atheist, which I'm sure you'll probably ask me about that. I don't know if you wanted me to go into my deconversion story right away, or if you
We're
want.
gonna we're gonna we're gonna cover that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's basically my background. But it was in the background. It was always there. I always
yeah.
believed in God. Um, my idea about what God was came from the basic notion of Christianity, that there was
Right.
this all perfect, good man who taught everybody and he died for everybody's sins. And that's just what I grew up with.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very similar for me as well. I also grew up in a religious environment, and So the funny thing is, it's like white noise. You can't help but be surrounded and engulfed by it, and after a while, you don't hear it anymore. It's just like a part of the background.
Yeah, it's just normal. I didn't encounter people who identified as atheist when I was growing up, so I had a very misunderstood view of what that word even meant. I had my own ideas, but they all came from religion, so they were all poison, not really representative of what the people who were using this label mean when they're saying it. So
So what was the linchpin? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Was it like an aha moment, or the very common thread that we pick up, that it was a gradual process of letting go, but you do get those people that go, I just woke up one morning and realized it's bullshit. What was it like for you?
For me, it's a little strange. It's kind of both. I wouldn't say it was necessarily one aha moment, but there was a year in which I was particularly confronted with some ideas that I needed to reconcile. And I guess I'll just put it like this. In my last few years of being a Christian, which I would say is probably around 2015 I became an atheist around 2017. So about 5-6 years ago. In the last couple of years, I was a very active online Christian apologist. I had become more religious the older I had gotten, even though not really being raised fully religious. It was something that I did come to embrace more. Some of that came from me joining the military, which is a religious organization, and meeting other people who believed in that. And just trying to find meaning in life and purpose and overcome depression, which is a bad way to do it. I didn't know about psychology then, but that's what they told you: pray and make everything go away, right? Was kind of the mentality. And so I got really into the Bible. I started reading it more often. I was, in these different online groups trying to defend Christianity and trying to own the atheists, but I found myself being challenged by these atheists with, these questions that I didn't really have good answers to. So I mentioned, when I was younger, I've always been a skeptic, even when I was religious. And I remember when I was a kid, I would question certain things in the Bible, specifically the creation accounts, the global flood story, the Exodus story, and just the general moral character of God seemed to be inconsistent. He was doing a lot of monstrous things. He was allowing a lot of evil behavior, but he was calling himself good and loving, and other people were calling him that. So it was very confusing, and I didn't have answers for that, but I still gravitated towards the belief because, I wanted to believe that there was a God who was watching over everything, and who was giving meaning and purpose and a source of morality. And by the way, there's an afterlife that you get to go to that's much better than this. And, so all of that stuff was attractive to me. So I was looking for reasons to believe in that. But when I would talk to a lot of these atheists, first of all, they weren't presenting themselves according to my expectation of them. I mentioned that I had a warped or misunderstood idea of what atheism is. I thought atheists were people who hated God because they wanted to sin. That's obviously not what it means. And, they were explaining this to me. They were saying, well, that's not what I am. And they were using these different analogies to explain why they just didn't have the beliefs that I did, And they were asking me questions like, what do you think about people who grow up in Japan where Christianity is not a national religion and hardly anyone? Do you think all Japanese people are just evil people who want to sin because they hate God when they have no concept of Christianity? And I didn't have a good answer for that. I realized that when they were challenging me with these questions, what I was saying wasn't really making any sense. It was just things that I'd been saying because they had been taught to me, but I didn't really question them deeply, or I didn't ask difficult questions like that. And so when they were asking me these difficult questions, I had come to a new understanding of what atheism was. And then I realized, okay, well, I can see that they're genuine. They're not just evil people who hate God. They actually don't believe in this God. So how do I make them believe? That became my mindset. I don't want to believe in the same thing that I believe in, because I'm not crazy, and if I know something they don't know, I should share that, right? So then that became my mentality. And so I spent a lot of time trying to convince them with arguments that I thought were convincing at the time, but that they were revealing to me were not convincing, and explaining to me why they weren't. And they were challenging me with all of these things that were inconsistent in scripture that I already knew, but I just kind of put to the side because I didn't want to go there. I wanted to believe this stuff. I never actually found answers for all of those things to make them make sense. So I was challenged now, because now I was actively defending it. And that forced me to read the Bible again, read it more deeply, read it carefully, and try to find answers to these questions. And when I did that, I found that instead of finding answers, I was only finding more questions. Reading the Bible caused me to question it more than giving me answers to it. And that was very problematic. And I found myself being stuck because I couldn't actually defend the belief to these people. The process of me wanting to defend my conclusion, and so that was the first armor, I would say. And then, so it was kind of a gradual process, but it happened fairly quickly. And eventually I got to the point where I realized that I was looking for ways to make what I already believed true. I wasn't actually looking at what was true. And that was like the aha moment. Once I realized what I was doing is true, you're not actually feeding the evidence to where you want it to go. And I think someone had mentioned that to me, and I thought about it like overnight. I lost a night of sleep trying to figure out if that's what I was really doing. And I realized that was what I was doing. And once I realized that, it was like, oh crap, what am I doing here? Like, that's not an
Oh, are we losing you, Bryce? Let me just double check here.
Oh, sorry. Little glitch there.
Yeah, you frozen up for me for a second.
Sorry. It may go in and out with those small glitches, but I think I was saying that I realized I realized that once I realized what I was doing, that I was leading the evidence where I wanted it to go. That's not an honest search for truth. And so I was back to square one. I realized that I didn't know a lot of the things that I thought that I knew, and I need to figure out what is true and what is not. And that's when I started learning about critical thinking and rational argumentation and skepticism. And then it was just a kind of a house of cards from there. Christianity and religion in general kind of crumbles once you start asking the difficult question, at least for me.
Yeah, it all comes down to that, that moment when you realize that you learn how to think and not what to think.
Right.
Because religion is very quick to teach you what you need to think, but very slow
what to believe.
It
tells you what to believe. It doesn't tell you how to think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
one of the most important questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the most important questions that I never asked when I was a Christian, but atheists would ask me this. It was the first time I was confronted with the question, why do you believe in the Bible? Because most of my arguments referred back to scripture. Anytime I had to defend why I thought God was doing something or was this way, or why you should believe that this flood thing really happened, it all pointed back to the Bible. But then they would ask me, why do you believe in the Bible? And I realized I didn't really have a good answer to that question. I was, because it's the Bible. It comes from God. Why do you think it comes from God? Well, because it says so. Why do you believe what it says? And then that's when I realized for the first time that I was engaging in circular reasoning. So I didn't have a good answer for that. I didn't even really know what the Bible was or where it came from, because they don't teach you that in church. And, the religious people I asked, they didn't seem to know or have good answers for it. Mm-hmm. They never talk about where the Bible came from. They just say it was written from God, but that's obviously not true. because we know it's printed. It says where it was printed, and it was printed by a factory in China, right? So it was not. It didn't come from God. So who actually wrote this? And if it did come from God, how could we know that? And no one could ever give me a good answer for that. And I didn't have good answers when people asked me. So I had to start researching the Bible and learning about biblical history, which is not religion. That's learning history. And when you start doing that and finding out what the Bible actually is, where it was produced, when it was produced, by whom it was authorized, which versions were which, this is made up. The entire narrative is not necessarily made up, but it does come from oral traditions, and the things that were canon were decided by the church, which was a group of men 300 years after all of this, actually more than that, but definitely centuries after all of these things were said to have happened. There's just a bunch of people decided, we're going to call this words from God, we're going to not call that. And then I realized this is not good enough. We don't have really good reasons for believing, certainly not the supernatural things in the Bible. But even some of the other historical claims, if they don't correlate to known history or known science, we don't have good reasons to believe them. So that was something else in doing biblical research.
Yeah, I've heard it said before that religion is like sausages. It's like when you know how they are made, you very quickly lose your taste for them altogether. And it's
I can't say that. I can't say that about all religions because I haven't investigated all religions equally. I know that a lot of people consider Buddhism a religion, but it's not a religion in the same sense that like Christianity or Islam are religions where we can, they're making supernatural claims and historical claims and scientific claims that are just known to be inaccurate. Buddhism, I think, is more about spirituality. So, which I don't really know what that means, but it means different things to different people. So I can't say that the more you know about Buddhism, it makes you go away from it. The opposite could be true, but that has been the case with Christianity in my experience, and most atheists that I've talked to who were raised in Christianity.
Yeah. So, was there a specific person or organization or any influence in your deconversion, or like I said earlier, was it completely an inside job? Did you just go about this all by yourself, or was there, some person or something that you read or encountered that sparked this journey?
There was no organization and no specific person. There's probably a couple of people that I could point to who are close friends of mine, who had different, but one of them is a deist, so he's not an atheist per se, but definitely not religious and not a practicer of Christianity. So I was a Christian, he was a deist, and he would argue with me about why I think the Bible is real, and so he helped me kind of explore these ideas more. And then there's another friend of mine I had he's gay, and he didn't understand. And I also am a member of the LGBTQ community as well. And he didn't know that at the time, but I think he suspected it. But he definitely questioned me about how I could be supportive of a religion that demonizes gay people, And there was a lot of cognitive dissonance and twisting myself in a pretzel, trying to explain how, no, God doesn't really hate gay people. That's just a misunderstanding. It's misinterpretation. You have to look at the deeper meaning, and God loves everybody. And he was getting was a friend of mine at the time, but he was getting really angry and frustrated with me because he knew that was all bullshit. And, here I am presenting myself as this reasoned, intelligent, educated, faithful guy defending something that's really not defensible. When you dig into the homophobic nature of the Bible and most of these religious texts, but the Bible, there's no way to really get around that. The Bible as written in English is a very homophobic document that demonizes gay people. It doesn't really recognize the existence of sexual orientation or gender identity. They didn't know about these things back when this document was written. They assumed, the assumption was that everybody is straight, and that some straight people, because they hate God and want to behave in deviant ways, they choose to engage in homosexual practices. That's what they thought, because they linked it with some of the other cultures that they saw at the time who were deemed evil. But they didn't really know what they were talking about. So they wrote down really horrible things about people who have an orientation towards the same sex. But that's neither here nor there. He knew what it says what it says, It says that gay people deserve the death penalty. That's supposedly written by God. So how am I defending that? Well, I had self-interest. I knew that I had some same-sex attraction, but I knew that I also wanted to believe that there was a guy who was going to give me an afterlife for worshiping it. So I was kind of stuck, and I didn't have good arguments. And he kind of pointed that out to me, and I realized that I need to reevaluate. I need to rehabilitate this particular argument if I'm going to make a convincing case. But again, the more I studied, the more I did research, the more I realized that doesn't work. When you look at the history of the church, not just the church, the Catholic Church, but most Christian churches, the majority of devout Christian people at this time are homophobic. They don't like homosexuality. They're afraid of it. They hate what it represents. They think it's taking away, marriage or God's meaning for marriage. And they think all kinds of things. Unless they happen to know someone who is in the LGBT community themselves, they may personally be affirming, but the majority of them were not at that time. I think it's kind of changing now, but at that time they were not. And so you can't ignore that. And you have to ask, well, why is this the case? Why would God make it this way? Why does God not like gay people? What's it to him? How does this injure him in any way? I didn't have good answers for those. And so I would say those are the two people who kind of put me on the path to certainly being a Christian apologist and digging deeper into the religion that I was professing. And then, but yeah, the House of Cards collapsing thing, that had to do with me realizing overnight, I am trying to make this work. I'm trying to make something that obviously doesn't work into something that does work because it makes me feel better. And that's dishonest.
Yeah. It's strange, and there's so many parallels that the current atheist movement and the LGBTQ movement can, there's a lot of lessons that one can learn from the other and vice versa. And
me as a member of both, because I exist I'm a super minority in my country,
doubly cursed.
More than that, so I'm African American, LGBTQ, atheist. I mean, I don't fit in anyone's particular box, so I'm constantly having to defend myself from all kinds of beliefs and assertions and ideas about me that are wrong, and it's a difficult thing to do, to have to live as, but it is what it is. I can't fake it. I suppose I could, but that would be dishonest to myself. I'm not going to pretend to be straight and act straight because society wants me to be. I'm not going to pretend to believe in magic when I don't actually believe that magic makes sense. That's what religion is, by the way. It's magical thinking.
It all boils down to integrity at the end of the day. That's the thing that's my takeaway from this whole journey over the past decade with atheism is just integrity, because religion asked me to sacrifice my integrity at the altar of some pie in the sky idea, and I, at the end of the day, today, I feel so much better about myself as a person because I'm authentic and I'm living my authentic life and, expressing myself authentically to people. It's not always filtered by this religious lens that I have to see everything through. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Well, it's interesting that you used the word integrity there. I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I used to be in the military. I was in the Air Force, the United States Air Force, for almost 21 years. And integrity is one of the core values of that military branch. But in trying to relate this to religion, I'm sure you've heard of C.S. Lewis. He was Christian, pretty famous Christian philosopher. He has this quote. He has an amazing quote, actually, but it's amazing for unintentionally ironic reasons, and it's about integrity. I'm sure you may be familiar with the quote. He says that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is looking, And what the point that he's trying to make is that people who are godly or people who believe in Christ will act with integrity versus people who don't, who could just, engage in all kinds of behavior and will only do the right thing when there's somebody watching them, But the irony of that statement is, do you believe that God is always watching, C.S. Lewis? Do Christians believe that God is always watching? If they do, by definition, they cannot have integrity. You know, it's a religion without integrity because you're only doing things because God is watching. Yeah. I, on the other hand, as an atheist who doesn't believe that there's any God watching anything, will only do good things because I have integrity, And so that's the failure of that reasoning to me. So the whole idea about morality, like, you talked about being true and having integrity with yourself. My moral framework has improved significantly since leaving Christianity. It's actually much more developed now. It's much more nuanced. It's based on education. I realize that morality is a learning process. It's not just, it's not as simple as black and white, or you can read a book that tells you this is good, this is bad. Like, that's not how morality works. And it's not how it should work either. If you need a book to tell you what is moral or the difference between right and wrong, it means that you have no concept of right and wrong. Well, you should develop your concept of right and wrong. You can just read as this list of commandments. That's not morality.
If you
that's
need
just authority, that's appealing to authority.
So I was going to say, like, if you need if you need a set of guidelines to be moral, you're not moral in the first place, to begin with. So just think about that before you go, I'm only moral because of the book and the fucking church and what.
Yeah, it's the same people who argue that, you can't have morality without God. Well, why can't you? Have you tried?
Yeah.
I mean, because I can, you just have to develop a moral framework based on reason and evidence and, what makes sense according to the majority. What is beneficial, good versus harm, social contract.
And, the people who ask those questions, like, where do you get your morality from? They haven't really given it 2 seconds worth of thought, because if you look at the world, morality differs from location to location. If it was injected and infused into humanity from on high, then why does it differ from place to place? What's considered moral in a first world country is definitely not considered moral in a third world country. And, what flies in Sweden is definitely not going to fly in Alabama.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
now I have a nuanced answer to this, because I do agree with you that the sociological conception of morality varies greatly from country to country, from society to society. What we understand as moral differs based on how we were raised. But I don't think that there are certain things that I do believe are innate. For example, if we discuss morality as the difference between right versus wrong in the sense of benefit versus harm, like, if we agree that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about morality, what is good for us versus what is bad for us, then there are certain objective things that we can look at. And there are certain things that we have that we evolved to help us recognize those differences. Like, most of us have the capacity for empathy. That is an evolved trait. That's part of being a social species. If we didn't have empathy, people who don't have empathy don't survive in society for very long. You kind of need that to be able to relate to your fellow man, to live in a cooperative society. But we depend on each other, and our actions have consequences on other people. Their actions have consequences on us. when we see someone else who is suffering, when they're like us, we feel that suffering, and it generally drives us to want to do something. We can look at something wrong and have an instinctive desire to help, you know? So at a very baseline minimum, we all understand the concept of suffering, you know? So that can help us to make moral decisions. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will. Just because we can recognize what is moral and what is not, it doesn't guarantee that we will act morally. A lot of people get that confused. You know, they confuse that they have like this is-ought fallacy. No, having empathy just means you have the ability to be a moral person. It means you can recognize what is morally correct in this situation and what is not. But it doesn't guarantee that you will do the morally correct thing.
Yeah.
And this is where society, the influence of society comes in. We are taught that certain behaviors, even though they seem bad, are okay because that's what's common in that society, or vice versa. Certain other behaviors that seem good or benign or harmless are evil. And so there's an internal conflict there for a lot of us when we have that, you know. But most countries, most people in most societies recognize that murder, for example, is a bad thing. We should not murder people. We should not tolerate rape.
Well, in most cases, you know, in most cases they do.
In most cases, right. But that has to do with our sense of self-preservation and survival and in a cooperative society. You know, it does not benefit anyone to view murder as a morally permissible thing because that puts you in danger. It makes no sense to view slavery as a morally permissible thing because you could be a slave, you know? So there are certain things that most societies recognize are immoral. And that's why theists, Christians, oftentimes go to murder and rape as their first examples of things that, you know, they would be doing if they didn't have God. I largely don't believe them when they say that, and I'm stealing a line from Matt Dillahunty when I asked him about this. You know, they use murder and rape because those are things that almost everyone recognizes are immoral, but they never use the more difficult things like homosexuality or drinking alcohol or these other things that they sometimes do, you know. Different people have different schools of thought on whether that's moral or not. So why don't you talk about those things, the areas where we disagree, where society decides
where there's an obvious gray spectrum.
Why would you go to something that everyone can see is immoral as your example of something that you would be doing without God? No, you wouldn't. If that were true, then most atheists would just be out there murdering and raping people, but obviously that's not the case. In fact, most of the people in the prison system in the United States are very religious. So I'm sorry, I went on a rant there, but
no, that's I agree 100%.
I also wanted to say hi to the people in the chat. I was aware that there are people in the chat that mentioned my name.
There's my old homies are watching, Bolelang and Esther. And
yes, I know Esther. I think I've had a conversation with her once.
She's great. Let's talk a little bit about activism, Bryce. People hear the word activism, they immediately think of someone chained to a truck at a Greenpeace rally or something. Where it can be, where activism takes a lot of different forms. It can, for me, it's just being the resistance. That's my first point of activism. And, what are your feelings about activism, and how important is it for us as atheists to engage in activism, be it whatever form it takes?
Wow. So that's a good question. So first, let me answer whether I'm involved in activism. It depends on what you mean, So I would say with regard to going out and raising money for certain causes, or marching around with signs I'm not doing any of that, so by that measure I wouldn't call myself an activist. But again, I do social commentary like I'm doing now, where I talk about atheism. I talk about other things too. I talk about progressivism. I talk about the LGBTQ spectrum. I talk about politics. And so I do a lot of that online. I'm not as active at the moment as I was last year and in the previous years. I've got a lot of other things going on. But if you're talking about, just engaging with people publicly, having conversations about the difficult topics, talking about abortion and the laws that are changing in our country, talking about the rise of secularism versus Christian nationalism. I do talk about those kinds of things, and my goal is to promote critical thinking. That's one of the goals of mine, because that's what helped me deconstruct. It's what helped me develop a moral framework that works. It's just helped me in life. It's helped me to think correctly. You mentioned at the top of the show, religion never taught me how to think. It just told me what to believe, but I never knew how to think before. Critical thinking is very important. It's really something that, in my opinion, ought to be taught at school age as compulsory. It's not something that should be an elective in college or at a university. It should be taught. Everyone should learn this. And it's a shame that, at least in this country, that they don't. But I just want people to have rationally justified beliefs, and especially to question their own positions when they're doing things that are perceived as harmful to other people. There's a lot of Christians out there and Muslims and people of different faiths who believe that they're doing the right thing, but they're causing harm. And that's something that should cause them to question what they're doing. Like, if you're doing something that's harming other people, you can call it loving, but is it really? How are you defining loving if you're causing harm to people? And in what ways are you causing harm? In what ways are you actually benefiting someone else versus harming them? That's what people should be looking at and judging their actions by. Not by doctrines of, behaviors that they're supposed to do according to a list of 10 commandments, because you don't know that this was even written by any spiritual being that's real. You've just been told that because that's what it says, So question your beliefs, and then also question the good outcome of them. Is there actually a beneficial outcome in what you're doing? Can you point to the beneficial outcome? Or is it just something you're told that there's a benefit and you'll find out sometime later after you die, but you don't know right now? You should probably question it. So I want people to have rationally justified beliefs.
Exactly. There's actually a lady in our local group here that's also very passionate about critical thinking and teaching critical thinking skills to young children, like especially at a primary school, which is probably like a junior school, in your terms, at that level. I think elementary is like that's a bit young, like it's more like the but it's a couple of years
probably middle school, junior high school
before they hit high school. It's at that age where and she does like workshops and goes into very rural areas, previously disadvantaged areas where she just teaches people all about critical thinking and how to think, how to spot logical fallacies. It's so important, because religion has a monopoly. It has a monopoly on these kind of conversations, and this kind of activism. It's just, if I can die very happily knowing that my life's purpose has been accomplished, if I know that I was a stone in religion's shoe for at least 5 minutes. That's it. Like, I can die in peace. I know that I've accomplished what I've come here to do.
I'm not someone who claims to have all of the answers. I don't believe that there is anyone who has all of the answers. And I think that some people who scream loudest about knowing the truth have less of it than those of us who admit that we don't, So I'm not out there trying to necessarily change other people's beliefs. I just want them to consider their own beliefs and whether they have rationally justified beliefs, because most people don't do that. most people
You
don't
know, at
do
the end
that.
of the day, I just want to sit down with someone and says like, you know what, I've thought about it in this way. Have you ever paused, taken like 5 minutes to think about it in this way? Does it make sense
Right.
to you if you come at it from this angle? That's
Yep.
all. That's all that I have as a mission. We always. This is an unfortunate reality that we have to actually talk about this, but especially here in the continent of Africa, religion has a very, very high impact on the lives of people, and it also affects them in a very negative way. We have a lot of, pastors that exploit people, and it's like a circus show. Every weekend, it's a circus show.
I've seen some of the YouTube clips of
who can do the most outrageous fucking stage show. So, I always like to highlight the harms of religion, and it might not, be something as overt as oppression and whatever. It also affects people on a very deep psychological level. It teaches you to think about yourself in terms of inferiority, in terms of submission.
No one knows that more than me.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you could reflect on your experience with some of the harm that religion has done to you.
Yeah. Well, so before I get into some of the harms that religion has caused, let me just preface by saying that becoming an atheist is not something that I came to lightly. It's not even something I wanted to do. And I think that a lot of religious people have this misconception that
you just want to sin. You all just want to sin.
Yeah. Right. They have on the.
We lost you there for a second.
Am I back?
You're back now.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like I'm back now. It's this. They have this false idea when in reality, becoming an atheist is quite traumatic. And it's not something that I was comfortable with when I realized it was happening, because now.
Ooh, we lost you there, Bryce.
I am so sorry about that. I'm so sorry about that. It looks like someone kicked out. Someone kicked out my plug there. So I'm back on Wi-Fi. So we'll see how this goes. But what I was trying to say was that it was a difficult experience learning to cope with, this idea of having one life now, where you don't get an afterlife anymore. This idea that you're not going to see your loved ones again who've passed on. This idea that there's no one watching over you when, you're on an airplane and you're afraid of flying, and you could just say a little prayer to make yourself feel better, that there's nothing to pray to. You lose a lot of things when you lose faith in God, and it's very scary, and it's relearning how to deal with life all over again. You can lose friends, you can lose family, you can lose community and, an identity. So it's not this fun thing where people are really rushing. Yeah. How can I get to be an atheist? Because I don't want to believe in that anymore. No, for years, I wanted to believe in all of this stuff. And I was trying to find reasons to believe. And I was finding that I had bad reasons or no reasons at all. And so, belief is not a choice. You're either convinced of something or you're not. And if you start investigating and you find that you don't have good reasons to believe what you do, you just stop believing in it. It's not like something you're actively trying to do. And so with that being said, getting to your question on whether religion has had a negative impact on my life, if you had asked me this question a few years ago, right when I was deconverting, I would have said no. Because I didn't realize the effect that religion has had on my life, But just that sort of dependency, using it as a crutch and using it as a coping mechanism to believe in unreasonable things like life after death, you know, that is harmful, because that's not a thing. We have no good reason to believe that we get another life after this, you know. I have a degree in psychology. The more you study the brain and behavior and neurology, the more you realize that this idea of a soul doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't work. You know, there's no accounting for the soul. It doesn't fit anywhere in the human mind, or, you know, so once you're dead, you're dead, you know, and that is a hard pill to swallow when you're coming out of religion. And I never learned any proper coping mechanisms for that, because religion teaches you that when you're dead, you're not really dead. You still get to go on after that, you know. And so that I would say is a harm. You know, just the what else? I would say that, I talked about, you know, identifying as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, having hate, or this idea that you should defy your nature to conform to the rules of some invisible, silent God that is written about in a book that's never actually bothered to have a conversation with you, you know, and kind of repressing your identity for years so that other people would accept you in the same faith. That is harmful, you know.
It's very harmful. That whole it just invalidates you as a person, you know, like it invalidates the core of your essence is how you express yourself as a human being, be it, you know, in your communication, in your sexuality, in, you know,
you're not a real person. Then you're a fake person. You're putting on a show.
Invalidated.
You just, and I realized that I was putting on a show and being a fake person for most of my life, just to try to conform to this idea that I have no reason to conforming to, and that doesn't make sense, you know? And so that's a harm, and just learning how to accept yourself and recognize that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a deviant, sinful person. You were just born with, you know, an attraction to this, and that's fine. That's normal. That happens in nature all the time. It's only humans that decided that this is bad, therefore we have to demonize it, you know? Like penguins, male penguins who have sex with other male penguins, they don't stop to think, oh, is this a sin? Maybe this is a bad thing. Maybe God doesn't like this. They don't give a shit, you know? They're just, they're attracted to same-sex penguins, and that's normal. Same thing with giraffes. Same thing with any other. So this is just something that happens in nature.
Completely ubiquitous.
And it's fine, and it's not harmful, and it doesn't cause anything, and it doesn't threaten the sanctity of penguin marriage. These are just ridiculous ideas that humans came up with that make no sense, and it harms people, you know, and it comes from religion. So, and also I would say in just some of my interactions with other people initially who were not religious or who had different beliefs, you know, religion is very tribalistic. So, you know, as a Christian, I was very anti-Muslim, of course. That was a religion of Satan, as far as I knew. Now, there's no such thing as Satan, and I realize that. So it's not a religion of Satan. It's a religion of man, just like Christianity is. But as a Christian, you know, you're taught to believe this is the religion of the devil, because look at what they did. So just in the way that I would treat other people and the presumptions or presuppositions I would have about people in other faith systems, I was not treating them all equally. I was demonizing every other religion, but propping mine up as if it were better. It's not. It's no more reasonable. The book is still just as bad as their book. You know, it's just I'm convinced this one's true, and they're convinced that one is true. And so, it's had numerous harmful effects on me. I guess that was a long-winded way of saying yes.
Well, you know, that's the funny thing is that you know, a lot of conversations you know, that need to be had in atheist communities, in my opinions, are conversations around religious trauma. And just the way that, you know, you are traumatized by it. Because I catch myself to this day, you know, where some kind of fucking religious hang up or something comes up and I'm going like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Why am I hanging on to this nonsense? You know, and it's like, it just weighs down your baggage with like tons and tons of unnecessary bullshit that you have to carry throughout your life. So, you know, these kind of conversations is very important to have, because we, you know, we need to learn to recognize the way that religion has affected and retarded the way that we think and interact with the world. You know, so
I used to be pro-life. because of religion. That was the only reason. I was pro-life. I wasn't really pro-life. I was pro women not having abortions because I thought it was immoral. I thought it was, I thought God had something bad to say about this. Turns out he doesn't. God doesn't have anything to say about anything. But even in the Bible, the Bible is not anti-abortion. If anything, the Bible is pro-abortion. But I didn't know that as a Christian because I didn't really read the Bible. I only half-assed read it. As an atheist, I read the Bible and I could read the parts where it gives instructions on how to have an abortion for women who are suspected of, whatever. And so, the fetuses are not people. They're human, but they're not people. They don't have personal rights yet. Rights are something that we grant based on age and independent status, and women are definitely people who have rights, and they should definitely have the right to bodily autonomy. And if a woman doesn't want to be pregnant or has become pregnant against her will or anything like that, she should certainly have the right to not be pregnant,
Exactly.
And so my perspective on that has completely changed. And, I value life, but I also value quality of life and bodily autonomy. And I have to weigh the rights of this individual versus the rights of something that's not an individual yet. A fetus is not an individual. It's physically attached and dependent on someone else's body. It's no more an individual than, a parasite is an individual.
Exactly. But now that you mentioned the word parasite, I was thinking about it earlier. Religion is about the only thing that behaves like a parasite does. A parasite will go into a population and it will consume all the resources and destroy all the resources, despite the fact that it's dependent on those resources for its continued survival. It's very funny that you bring it up. And
I don't want to demonize all religion or say that nothing good comes from it. Religion has been necessary to the development of society. It does provide a sense of community, a sense of belonging, fellowship. It gives people motivations to work together. And so it does do some good things. And as I said, it can be used as a coping mechanism for uncertainty. God of the gaps, that's pretty much all that is. We can't explain these scary things. Therefore, God, it's God's plan, and so that is helpful. That is helpful to some people.
As a species, we are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. We loathe uncertainty. I don't know. It's like some evolutionary remnant, whereas if you were uncertain about the rustle in the grass, you're dead. Whereas if you are uncertain about it and you run, you stay alive. So I think that's something that stuck with us as a species.
Well, we are naturally curious. We want to know about the world, but we also have there's an expression, knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you have, the more influence you have to affect the course of your life. And when people lack data, when they lack information, it becomes scary to them because now they realize they're not in control of an aspect of their life. And so they struggle to find meaning and to find answers, even when they don't have the answers. That no one likes to say, I don't know. If they don't know the answers, a lot of times people will instinctively make up an answer just to make themselves feel better because they don't like not knowing, like you said, And that's how religion gets more and more developed over time.
It's that moment when they decide a bad answer is better than no answer at all.
Yeah, you see lightning bolts coming out of the sky. You don't understand electricity. You have no understanding of weather dynamics, atmosphere, charged particles, but that's some scary shit, And so what could this be? Oh, we've angered the gods, let's do something to make ourselves feel better. Let's worship the gods. Oh, and then the storm dissipates and the lightning goes away. We must have pleased the gods, So it's not a real explanation. It didn't explain anything, but internally you've made yourself more comfortable about this scary thing that you don't understand by making up an explanation.
Yeah. Speaking of knowledge is power. If you had the ability to reach out to young Bryce, to reach out and sow some seeds of wisdom, what is something that you would say to a younger version of yourself just to help kickstart this journey?
I would say we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I would say to my younger self, go take a college level course on critical thinking and rational argumentation. Just one university level course on critical thinking, because as you said, this is something that should have been taught compulsory in grade school. And I would just try to tell myself, learn about informal fallacies, learn about circular reasoning and arguments from incredulity or argumentum ad populum, learn about burden of proof, understand what kettle logic means, special pleading, post hoc rationalizations, the difference between correlation and causation, which has more to do with science, but still learn about this stuff. Learn what cognitive biases are, cognitive dissonance, things like that. And just try to convince myself to appreciate the value of skepticism, of rationalism, and empiricism, because this is what will help you formulate rationally justified beliefs.
Yeah.
So that's what I would tell myself. Learn about that stuff and you will be much better off. You'll be much more comfortable as a person. You'll have a much broader knowledge base than you did before. You'll have foundations, rational foundations for the things that you know. And you'll be able to negotiate life much more comfortably that way.
I agree.
Yeah.
Bryce, I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time, waking up early, and sharing your journey with us. Where can people find you on social media if you have any to promote?
Well, I didn't prepare links. I am on Facebook, of course, as Bryce Cornell. I have a YouTube channel as well, Bryce Aroni, and I will. I'll have to provide that after the fact because I didn't.
Yeah, you can message me. Yeah, you can message me the links and I'll put it in the description of this live.
Yeah, but if you just search Bryce Aroni on Facebook or YouTube, I'm going to be the one that comes up. And I haven't been really active lately. As I mentioned, I'm trying to complete my master's degree right now. I've been moving, hopping back and forth between countries with strange living conditions. So there's been a lot going on. So and also just I've had to take a break just to concentrate on my own mental health. Sometimes you can get so caught up in presentation and having a social media presence that you lose perspective and you start to lose yourself. And I realized that was happening to me. I never wanted to be famous or internet famous. And eventually it started getting to the point where I realized that I was being inundated with friend requests and people were requesting me by name, people I'd never heard of, and asking me if I wanted to do debates with different people. And I'm like, whoa, I'm just
Oh, you froze up for us there.
Let's wait till it comes back.
Yeah, give it a second.
Is it back? There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who has opinions about stuff, and people seem to want to hear what I had to say. And it was cathartic and helpful for me to have discussions with other people. But I don't need to get big from this, So I'm happy that other people are like watching my stuff and are interested in some things I have to say. And I plan on doing some more stuff in the future, but it's not going to be on a regular basis. It's just when I feel like it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the right approach to have, It's like that moment when you realize, hey, wait a minute, clout is a drug.
Yeah.
It's like you're
getting too big for your britches, as some people would say here. Yeah.
No, it's definitely you have to be aware of it, because some people get completely wrapped up in the whole like internet thing, and it becomes their world. So
you can get lost in it. You can lose yourself. You can lose your whole purpose. The whole reason you started talking in the first place. It can become. You can start off with these great ideas about what you want to promote, and then it can turn into, how do I get more views? How do I get more followers? How do I get more of this? How do I get monetized? And it's like, I didn't really do any of this for this reason. Like, I'm just a guy, But we're like, awesome. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's good. It's like I said, I'm glad that people like enjoy sometimes the things I have to say. There's some people who don't like it,
Yeah.
so I have to acknowledge them. But you can't please everybody, right?
Exactly. Amazing. Again, thank you for being so generous with your time, Bryce. Let's wrap it up here, and message me those links to anything that you want to promote. I'll pop it into the description. And
Sure
look after yourself, take care, and we'll see you on the flip side.
All right, thanks for having me.